Hello everybody, welcome to the next segment. We're going to welcome onto stage the second sitters, Jude and Hannah, and Alex, Vanessa and Rachel. Please give them a warm welcome.
So thanks Leanne and team for putting on a really amazing event. It's so nice to be in a room with other people, finally, after what seems like an eternity, doesn't it? And really, thank you very much for inviting us to revisit this talk on upholstery sustainability. 5 years ago, as Leanne said, we did a talk at the Jeffrey Museum, which is now the Museum of the Home, called Upholstery: A Sustainable Future. And the world's changed quite a lot in the last 5 years, hasn't it? So it'd be really nice to revisit the topic again. Quickly, a show of hands, who's an upholsterer? And that includes all the trainees. Oh, yeah. So we can get quite nerdy. Yeah? Okay, cool. So just a quick round of introductions. My name's Jude, this is Hannah, and 10 years ago we got together and under the name of Second Sitters and put on an exhibition of contemporary upholstery, and things kind of snowballed from there. We now have a touring exhibition called Upholstery: Evolution to Revolution. We put on events, publications, we've got a book, all sorts, happenings, T-shirts, the lot. All with the aim to promote and explore the craft that, we all love, and that's why we're here. So Hannah's going to introduce the panel.
Yeah. Okay. So starting from closest to me is Alex Law. He's been working as an upholsterer since the late 1980s, following the traditional path from apprentice through journeyman and onto master upholsterer. He is founder and principal tutor at the School of Upholstery in Faversham, Kent. He has a vast working knowledge of both traditional and modern materials and has consulted and developed natural eco-seating systems for several leading national companies. He is also the author of 2 successful upholstery books. And we have Vanessa Butt, who runs Vanessa Butt Upholstery, based in Lambeth, South London. She specialises in sustainable upholstery and has pledged to go foam-free in 2022. She is the creator, yay! She is the creator of the Thought-Filled Cushion, an alternative to foam using natural materials. She is also an upholstery tutor at London Metropolitan University. And last but not least, Rachel South is an upholsterer and third-generation caner and seat weaver, currently based in Hackney, East London. Her expertise in seat weaving explores the craft utilising a wide variety of materials. She has worked in various roles within the furniture and textile industry, and Rachel is passionate about supporting recycling and sustainable living, hoping each reconditioned piece of furniture will last for another generation of use. She too is a tutor at the London Metropolitan University. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to start with Alex. You posted on Instagram not that long ago. I'm just going to read it out just for those of you that didn't see it. It's just a segment of it, actually. So I'm looking forward to exploring what eco-upholstery really means in 2021, pitching a call to action to independent upholsterers across the UK and beyond to define and set new standards in eco-upholstery for now and the future. When we read that, it really resonated with us. And it sounds huge. So what's the plan?
Essentially, the idea is, I think I've realised that as an independent upholsterer, I don't have buying power or time, essentially, to massively influence the industry in regards to sustainability beyond making examples. So how do we scale that? How do any of us scale that as individual craft practitioners? And realistically, we need some way, a forum to coalesce and actually bring together our varied skills and sort of previous experiences actually into what happens with upholstery in the future. And mainly through meeting students in my own classroom who'd come from different backgrounds, several from the fashion industry, where obviously the drive to sustainability has been huge. I was sort of introduced to concepts of ethical audit trails and sort of understanding supply chains more, and realising that actually that could be the driver for where we could take things from the discussions we've had previously and from the research that we've already done, I think.
So it's kind of just discovering the kind of having a kind of traceability of materials and kind of having some sort of, I guess, like a Wikipedia of maybe like raw materials and where they come from and kind of all those sort of processes and production methods. Is that what you kind of
absolutely.
see?
But kind of giving it a home as well that actually can be populated by everyone, and it being sort of inclusive rather than something that is exclusive. But obviously with commercial, well, the reality is if you're a business and you develop a material, you're going to want ownership over that IP and intellectual property. And you're going to really want to have principal access to those materials. So is it in the pure interest of a business to disseminate that information to the wider buying, technically your competitors? Well, it isn't actually. So,
I mean, just explain a little bit on the need for it. Why do you think we need this? To be, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, why do we need to have this sort of list of eco? It's clearly not there, is it?
Yeah.
And what's the problem with the materials that we're getting or that we're...
I suppose to address the need from clients' point of view, I think every upholsterer is more increasingly having conversations with clients where the origin of the materials it used to be 20 years ago it was just about process. People were interested, is this foam or is this perpetuating the existence and perhaps developing traditional craft knowledge, and are you authentic because you're actually you've got a foot back in the tradition, but then you're actually sort of exploring new ideas and pushing forwards. And of course, probably second sitters, I guess, was an embodiment of actually sort of that kind of conversation. And of course, now it's actually we're looking at the environment that these materials are grown in, and then every element of the process of it coming through to us. So, and clients are quite comfortable having those kind of conversations and challenging us.
It feels a bit more normal, doesn't it, now to actually... I think this is what's happened in the last 5 years, maybe. These conversations open. Having rewatched the sustainability talk, circular economy, the circular economy was like the first time it was really being mentioned and it was having to be explained, and now we're kind of all quite cool with that word, I think, and if we're not, we'll explain it later. But, it's kind of like the provenance of what you're, like you're saying, it's not just about foam or materials, it's about, well, where's that from? Where's that from? And it's the same with food and everything, isn't it? And fashion and, the Herdwick sheep, it's like, see their little faces,
I mean, it was kind of interesting before. I was thinking about the materials that you use, Rachel, and kind of in my head, I always thought that they came from Indonesia or something. And I know that we had a quick chat, and I was really surprised at what you told me where they came from. So could you just tell us a little bit about your materials and the processes?
Yeah. So thinking about the provenance of materials, that's something that, as a chair caner, the rattan does grow in Indonesia, the Philippines, and I'm quite used to just buying it in from the supplier. But I've sort of tapped into some other techniques using river rushes and willow, both of which are really common European plants. They literally grow everywhere. And I've sort of got in touch with people and managed to go and harvest my own river rushes down in Somerset. And willow I get from a friend of mine. She's a basket maker and she grows it in her garden in Hastings. And there was something when I first made my first sort of willow woven seat that was sort of it was really resonant to have sort of done that full circle, harvested the materials, created the skeins for weaving with, and then made the seat as well. And this does tap into very traditional skills.
So the willow is a new material in chair caning in this country?
It's
Or
not. It would have
been.
It was used from about 1840 onwards. There's a certain type of chair that was always woven with willow, and it just fell out of favour, fell out of fashion. It's quite labour intensive, so I think that's something with a lot of the sustainable materials, there's sort of added labour in there. But like a lot of upholsterers, you know, once you start sort of working, you get quicker, and it's no longer such a problem. But the full circle thing, I think, was something that was really surprising and satisfying, and something that I've thought about more with upholstery now as well. It sort of needs to spread into that sort of area too. But
Yeah, and is it, how often do you coppice it, and what is the kind of process?
The rushes, they get harvested in June or July once a year, and I go with a whole group of people, and it's a little team, and it's all wrapped up in bolts, which are measured by the sort of circumference of the bundle of rushes. Got lots of it over there to show you. And willow you actually harvest in the winter at this time of year. So I sort of went and got a load of willow down in Hastings just a few weekends ago. So it sort of also feels a little bit medieval, and I'm not someone who sort of looks to I'm not a sort of sentimental about the past. I'm not interested in it as a point of I want to be the traditional. I'm sort of very future thinking, but I think the grounding in these sort of traditional crafts is a great sort of jumping point for the sort of climate crisis that we're actually facing now, and it's all industries, isn't it? And we're sort of grounded in sustainability. We take furniture, you know, I don't think we should forget that. We shouldn't sort of beat ourselves up because we've got foam in our workshops. We are grounded in sustainability, but it's sort of improving, you know, and upholsterers have always been resourceful people throughout the sort of 600-700 years of history that we have. They've taken straw off the floor, they've taken animal hair out of a stable, and it's all sort of gone into, or just a random bag of rags that you've got, you know, at the back of your workshop. But the resourcefulness, I think, is what keeps everything buoyant in our industry.
So you're kind of seeing the future in a way as actually we should all be looking in our back gardens a little
definitely.
bit more, and yes, maybe some of those materials are actually what would have been traditionally used, because I'm sure, you know, when you undo chairs, you know, seaweed falls out, or straw, or paper.
Right.
Someone was it you telling us about the paper?
Sharon.
Sharon was someone in our workshop actually was telling us about, like, shredded paper works really well. So
with
you know, you think
straw,
that's sort of ancient, but actually, why is it? You know?
Well, I was speaking to one of the other tutors at London Met and about this sort of talk and sustainability, and very straight up he was like, well, you've been stripping chairs down for years. Straw, you know, it's there, isn't it? And actually, as a seat weaver, there's a certain type of chair that we do use straw for, an Orkney chair, and they use rye straw or oat straw, which is very soft. And I'm actually sort of thinking that could be a really good material to try and use for, you know, your traditional stitched edge. And it's there, again, it's, you know, farmers are literally, costs nothing really, does it?
It's sort of a byproduct almost.
It does, exactly, a byproduct. I've made one seat, a chair back, using rye straw, which I got from a thatcher, actually.
And what properties does that have?
It's quite soft, right. So rather than what you'd think of as a sort of brittle, crunchy,
sort of yellow, grass, shiny.
It's much softer, so much more pliable for that sort of sculpting and, you know, getting a needle through it. So I'm really into the sort of raw materials at the moment. That's sort of quite exciting, I think. So.
And then sort of Maybe we have a little word with Vanessa now, actually, because yours is definitely a materials sort of journey, isn't it? So you decided to go foam free in 2022, which is quite a big statement. Do you want to just tell us about that and what the journey was for you to kind of putting it out there? Because I don't know if anyone followed, well, I'm sure you all follow her on Instagram, but, you know, it was kind of like, hey, this is what I'm doing. So, yeah, just give us a little bit of a chat about that and then the development maybe of your cushion as well.
It was in 2019, there was a chemical called TDI. Sorry, it's going to sound really kind of geeky now, but which is involved in part of the making of foam, and it became almost out of stock. So foam, I don't know if any of you remember this, I'm sure you guys will remember this, but foam became really hard to get hold of or really expensive. And so for the modern furniture that I was upholstering in the workshop, I started to use more rubberized coconut fibre. And I really enjoyed working with it. Is everyone aware about rubberized coconut fibre? It's also called Coco Lock. And it's so it's the coconut husk, which we often use as just the fibre when we do traditional upholstery. But then it's sort of suspended in latex, so it's available in sheet form. And I think, Alex, you've got some different densities on the table round the back, so go and have a look, because it's obviously available in different forms. But anyway, I was using that and I was really enjoying it. And then when foam started getting less expensive, I sort of started carried on using the rubberized coconut fibre, because I was thinking, why did I do upholstery? It's, in a way, it's like a trade or a craft that's like counter to this throwaway society. It never used to be, because it never used to be a throwaway society, but the skill in itself is that. So why am I then filling this furniture with something that's, plastic, basically? And we all know the downsides to foam, so I'm not going to go into all of that. But there's furniture that's been designed with foam in mind. So, you come across lots of different sort of challenges when you start looking at it. And the biggest thing for me was the fact that a lot of modern chairs, as you can see around the room, or you will all know, they have a removable seat cushion, a box cushion, we call it. And, I was ordering in these like slabs of foam covered in polyester wadding and then stockinette on top of it. And it just wasn't really sitting right with me. And I think that is something that we can all think about, hopefully, coming away from today and like us all chatting, is not just what we can do collectively, but what we feel as individuals, and what some people call it like a moral compass. I think that might be a little bit too strong, but it's kind of like what sits right with you. Like if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable about it, then challenge it. And it might be that other people in your upholstery life have said and encouraged you to work with foam for whatever reason, and you do when you're learning. I think it's really important to work with foam, because you will hopefully finish and get a job, and you may end up working in a workshop where they use foam, and you can't just, tell them that the materials are no good. So, there are reasons that we need to sort of keep using it with that sense. But when we know how foam works and what we're looking for, then we can look at the alternatives. So we need something that's got good resilience, and we need something that, when you turn it around the shape of a frame, you're manipulating it. You need something that's got that kind of crisp sort of edge, which, especially for like modern furniture, mid-century modern as well, where the filling is quite thin. And sorry, I feel like I'm going off my journey.
Great. Keep going. Keep going. I love it. Mesmerised. I'd love to be in a workshop.
My journey. So then I started making I started trying to come up with an alternative. Let's just kind of rein it in a little bit. And I knew I wanted to use the coconut fibre. Yes, there's problems with it because air miles, it's coming from India and Sri Lanka. So we've got to consider that. there's also the fact that it's made in, there's coconut plantations, I should say. So there's not that much research about this, but we don't know if it's really good for the environment or not. Like, is it sort of knocking out species of beautiful animals and plants in the world? So we have to be really mindful of those things. But to me, it sat, like I was saying, it sat with me a bit better than using foam. So for me, that's what I wanted to use. On its own, you can't just put it inside your box cushion cover, because I don't know if many of you've worked with it, but it just doesn't have the resilience. On top of that, when you cut it, which is really easy to do, you can just use a normal foam cutter. The edge is not as smooth as the foam, so it's got, the fiber's kind of a bit prickly, so you can feel it, and it's not that nice. So I knew I needed to have the extra wadding, and I chose wool. And on top of that, I knew I couldn't just wrap it in wool, because the whole thing may collapse. So I decided that tufting it would hold it together nicely and give it a little bit more density. And then I covered it in wool again and put it in a calico case. And it's been in development. I've brought some prototypes today. So after lunch, I think I'll get them out and you can all have a look, and I'll pass them around. You can take them all apart because they're just prototypes. I've started stitching the edges now as well to make it a bit more crisp. So if you're doing like a top stitched cover, you need the shape to be nice and square, don't you? As opposed to kind of like a bit more of a curved shape. So, yeah, I mean, I could talk about it for ages.
So,
I feel like I've taken up too much time.
Is there anything about the materials that were readily available to you? So the cocoa lock and the wool that caused problems, like in the sort of original prototypes, and this kind of goes back to a little bit about what Alex was saying about this sort of, appraising, and we were talking about appraising, weren't we, in our pre-chats, appraising materials. Was there anything that you said, you cut the cocoa lock and it's a little bit fuzzy on the end? I mean, is that something that can be changed, do you think? Or is that just the nature of the material? I mean, you or Alex or both, did you find that it was a problem with your thought, Phil? Just really quickly, and then
yeah. So yeah, it is.
I don't want to put words into your mouth.
It is a problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to soften it somehow, but without taking the shape away.
I just know from when I've used it, sometimes it's just really fluffy on the edges, isn't it? And it's a bit. You
have to kind of trim it a little bit with your scissors afterwards, and it is. But we work with it, It still sat better with me. And also, what I think is that everyone's got so used to foam, and it's like crisp and clean, and go to DFS and everything, But if we're going to say, okay, this is a natural material, don't expect the same thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay,
I think people get used to it. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Get used to it.
So do you think there's developments that could be made in the materials that we already have? Or?
The idea of foam, I don't want to bash foam at the end of the day.
No, I mean,
it's there. There's 68 million bottoms in Britain. Just think how many. You're sat on a chair now that isn't upholstered, but you probably sat on a few already today. And you might be sitting on different seat units by the time you get home. So throughout the day, each of us might sit on half a dozen seats that have been upholstered. Well, it's half a dozen seats for 68 million people. That's a lot of seating. And actually, the reality is where we're at with the industry. We've had 100 years, essentially. I think it was 1938. I think DuPont developed the polyurethane foam. So, the whole supply chain's infrastructure is built around it. So we're not gonna eliminate foam unless one person at a time.
Vanessa's going to eliminate.
Which I applaud you. It's entirely my ethos. It's that idea. One individual can do something.
No, I mean we're talking about independent upholsterers, aren't we?
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
not talking about manufacturing because
So
we're not manufacturers in that way.
So that side, that we have to separate that in a way because it will always be ubiquitous. But the reference with the foam is essentially it is an omni-filling. You've got a void, and you can take one substrate, pop it in there. Okay, you might need to soften it for the cover with a wadding layer over the top or something like that. But essentially, it's an omni-filling. Generally, if you're trying to do the same job using natural materials, you've actually got to build a system that kind of are in harmony with one another. So obviously, as Vanessa's describing there, the problem with the rubberized hair, if it's pressed in a hydraulic press, so we've got coconut, a loose, springy fibre that is then bonded with a latex material around it. It goes under hydraulic press, so you get two surfaces, and the edges are obviously cut, and that's where you get the sort of fibrous little hair sticking out the side, or they can actually sort of percolate or sort of migrate out into the sitter. And obviously, comfort is not just the anthropometrics and ergonomics and the position you're in. Obviously, it is that immediate contact between your sort of flesh and the surface. So you've got to negate that, and that requires different materials, and they've got to have different properties. So perhaps felted materials obviously have a different agenda, they've got a different brief, so they've got to hold together. In fact, actually, it was really good hearing about the cable and Blake there with the sort of the reference to the fact that there's inherent fire retardancy within wool as well, just by the fact that it's spun so tightly. It can't necessarily, the fibres don't transmit the oxygen, which is essentially the propellant for fire. So that's really why wool works really well.
So natural materials are inherently fire retardant.
Not
generally,
all,
not all.
But
so,
you can process them, and it is about that being an oxygen barrier.
You wouldn't necessarily need to put any sort of chemical on them. So it's just in the processing.
Not.
It's just it's
actually. I mean, obviously there are the appropriate
which is a
treatments
positive, right?
for different things. Yeah, but of course there are materials out there that are inherently fire and actually pest resistant as well. I mean, that's one of the other issues with
what would be pest resistant, just so that.
Well, there's certain plants, the oilseed rape actually, if anyone's in agriculture, you'll know it's actually, as a crop, it's one of the easiest things for storing. You don't have to do a lot of field management around sort of invasive little animals coming into your fields and so forth. So there are these kind of inherent properties within the fibres themselves that you can sort of utilise.
Have you used anything like that?
I've tried with certain stranded materials, almost
and,
a little bit in your way.
Yeah.
From similar experience of taking apart chairs and seeing I think Thatcher, so they call it long straw, or whatever, where so you've got a large amount of tube between the nodes, and some of the thatching, straws obviously have a long enough sort of strands there that it equates quite well to the sort of dimensions of certain seats. Dining chairs, I think that they're kind of in the 16th and 17th century, just before they were sort of really building up stitching techniques, there were quite a lot of sort of front edges were
so
actually...
Ray, did you just ring up a Thatcher?
I did, yeah. I needed to sort of source this particular straw, and I was living in Devon at the time, and I did go to a farmer, and he sort of pointed me in the direction of his sort of barn full of bales of straw, but that's sort of all crunched up and sort of mulched almost. And I realised that bales of straw were not what I needed, so I got in touch with a Thatcher, and there's a whole world around the sort of plants that they use.
And what did they think?
Oh, they're just like, oh, that sounds interesting. Just another way to sort of use the plant. I just sort of was thinking, though, while we're sort of talking about the materials, going back to what you said at the start, Alex, that there's such a lot of knowledge held between upholsterers, trainees, that this sort of idea of a materials database of some where that knowledge is. So if you were thinking of using it for cushions, or there's sort of the experience and the sort of information about the materials is there somewhere, because I feel like that's what's missing, and our suppliers sort of hold this monopoly, and you sort of hit a wall with it if you happen to ask, well, where's the koi coming from, and why is it just one type of koi that we get now, or you know what I mean? I feel like that's a sort of something that is a bit mystifying as someone who's interested in where the provenance of what I'm using, you know.
Yeah.
Can I just butt in?
Yeah, do it.
Can I just...
Oh.
I'm going to take your coat off.
Here we go.
That's it. Gloves off.
Right then.
So we're going to... We'll have a few of these little sample packs that some of you may have seen them before or whatever. So these are materials that are allegedly available in the UK. And I say allegedly because sometimes they're experimental materials that are produced for sort of R&D purposes. So not everything will be available. And you can see in there what I was talking about, this idea of a system. So you've got the suspension system, sort of spring system materials, and then you have wadding materials in there. But how do we get access to that? So a manufacturer will develop some of these things and they put them out there, and then it's actually the sundry companies that choose what's available. And then there's a discussion, usually about money, I guess, and scale and volume. They want some guaranteed sales. Could you give us some feedback on how many units we're going to have to produce? Because of, there are pragmatic reasons why a product developer is going to need a certain guaranteed amount of volume of something to be made. So we're like way downstream in the order of actually who gets to choose, or what we get to choose, what goes in our material. Obviously, upholstery industry moves at a glacial pace. I think we're now being slightly outpaced by the bedding industry.
Have you actually spoken to NCAV about the materials or that you would want, or kind of, I'm getting a look from Vanessa. You've tried to speak to them about kind of what is it that we want. If you're thinking it's the suppliers, so it's like Martins or something, that they are making their decisions, but you can't. The
most efficient way to talk to them is through a third party, i.e. your sundry supplier. Because this is the thing, we're all so individually small customers for them. If you have a materials budget or or cost, if you're buying several £1,000s worth of stuff a year, that's actually not enough to access a seat at that table.
This is your big plan, right? How do we kind of all get together? Or are you going to? Do you know?
Well, I suppose the idea is...
we're all together now. We kind of... I'm just thinking, because we don't have loads of time left, and I know that, well, hopefully you've got some questions.
Yeah.
5 years ago, the energy in the room was amazing, wasn't it? It was great, and everyone was like, yeah, let's change it, let's do it, let's do it. And I know that obviously COVID happened and various things have kind of stopped that. But I know that when we spoke, we were like, okay, let's actually make it happen this time. Do you know what I mean? Let's actually use the moment to change things and implement all these lovely, amazing ideas we've got.
Well, I suppose creating that forum or that platform, you mentioned COVID, but actually one of the things, I think the lesson, anyone listens to Radio 4, you'd be bored of hearing how much Zoom has changed our lives, But actually, in a way, we have these sort of formats really for actually having dialogue and span sort of distances, and of course through crowdfunding and actually I think people getting past, myself included, every pound in my pocket is hard earned, and you've got to be really convinced if you're sort of pledging into something, but there are very credible, tangible ways of us sort of coalescing as an industry full of individuals and actually have a voice that's stronger than our own and actually have a buying power. And I think ultimately that is the point.
To actually
really,
affect a change
you know,
in the materials that we...
And it's about reversing that sort of stream down and actually us turning around to the sundry suppliers and sundry manufacturers and say, well, we want you to develop this and we want to understand everything from the point where it's at our bench back to the moment it's grown or there's a seed in the ground or there's a sort of parang cutting a blade, you know, a leaf or something.
We haven't got long, but just quickly to touch on sort of material developments from that, because you were talking, you know, development, and I don't know if Vanessa, you've done a little bit of research into kind of, you know, there are some sort of crazy, well, they're not crazy, are they? But other industries kind of develop materials, you know, like out of recycled plastics, or you were talking about something in, is it mycelium?
Yeah, the mycelium. That is really cool because it's made from waste. It's made from agricultural waste. And so you can use wood chippings, or I think they use hemp as well, and then they can put it in a mould and sort of introduce the mycelium, which, if you don't know what that is, sorry, I'm talking to as if you're in my head. It's the root of a mushroom, so not the mushroom itself is the kind of fruit, but it's the root of that, and it will grow. The spores will grow and create a sort of foam inside this mould of the agricultural waste. It takes about a week, I think, to really grow and make something that's solid. But then you just take the mould out and you can heat treat it so it doesn't biodegrade, it doesn't kind of react to the moisture. And you've probably already had, because it started off in the States, but in the UK they've got the license to make kind of like hard packaging. So you might have already had something with the packaging. But they have also made this foam, and it's called Mycoflex, or I think something like that. And it's actual, it's you know, it's elastic.
I was actually reading, I think it's Mercedes, I think they've just brought out, they're prototyping a car, and it is the upholstery or the filling is mycelium.
In the car upholstery. It's interesting that you say that, because I mean, one of the reasons that, you know, upholsterers can't fight the foam industry is like the automotive industry and construction industry. You know, obviously, like the more that keeps going, foam will keep being made. But look out for it, because I think it must be coming over here soon. It's really cool.
Weren't you saying that you'd used the leather, or you've seen, is it kind of leather? No, but it does exist. You haven't used it. Okay.
So just before we take questions, I can't believe we've spoken for like 45 minutes.
I know, we haven't even talked about education or...
done that one or that one, yeah. I mean, we're all going to be around later, so I know that, you know, if you don't get to ask a question now, then we're hanging around for the day. But just to kind of over question, really briefly, what would you like us all to take away from this discussion today? Rachel?
I think, just to touch on education, that
Yes,
anyone
please.
who is teaching or running upholstery schools, we need to start the discussion there, and we certainly start that with our students. The first time we sort of begin to show them 20th century modern materials and foams. And we also, when we get to stage 2, modern post-1950s armchairs, we are also offering students an opportunity to use alternatives to foams and to try with those, the cocoa lock and wadding.
And is that student-led, is it?
It has been student-led.
I know from you two, but obviously, I mean, that's obvious.
I think it is student-led. You know, it's how we live today, isn't it? There's a climate crisis and everyone is aware, and we're thinking about our clothes, our food, the environments that we're living in, beds. It's our lives now, isn't it? So
it should be part of the conversation for sure.
It really should, And so I think sort of as a teacher, that's sort of where I'm starting the conversation and where things have to come from for our industry as a whole. So that's my little
definitely.
Vanessa.
I think moving forwards, I'd like to encourage everyone to experiment as much as possible. If you're learning in an environment where the materials are what they are, then obviously you can't necessarily push too much. But, I mean, do ask lots of questions to your tutors, but it's not going to stop you from going home and in your own space, just playing with materials and stitching them and just working out. Because I've made this cushion, and I'm not saying, right, this is the new alternative to foam at all, because I think someone can do a much better job. And I think the more we experiment, the more things. So I was thinking about starting a hashtag.
Okay.
I've never done that before.
Okay.
But
Today's the day.
today's the day.
Hashtag I've never
Done that before. Is that
Hashtag, well,
That's
yeah.
pretty good,
Yeah,
actually.
I mean, why not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
There we go.
No, we could do that. I mean, we even just about 5 minutes before we came on, Rachel and I were saying we could call it what did we say?
Foam-free future.
A foam-free future. So I'm just kind of, I don't quite know how this movement will start, but I was hoping that maybe it would start in this room, hit it today. But experiment and be creative. Yeah.
Excellent. Alex.
I think ultimately it's. I've like many of us, I've not been in a room with this amount of people in for a couple of years now, or getting towards that. But already it's been brilliant just having communication and sharing ideas and actually being really open and not fearful and protective over innovation or technique and process, or and actually sort of sharing that sort of stuff. But I'm not someone who's massively IT literate or heavy on social media or whatever. It's for various reasons, but I can quite often make something faster than it takes me to write 20 words about it. And we may be talking days, But it's there's some really good stuff around the room, just physically sort of seeing ideas, sort of taking an old technology and sort of like seeing, or technique, and sort of seeing where you could take it into, applying it for structure and sort of maybe not just hiding process on the inside, but also just kind of like really sort of, I suppose, supporting one another and actually moving forward in a really democratically open way. I suppose it's the sort of Tim Berners-Lee approach to developing something. Actually make it open source. Actually don't fear other people maybe having an idea that you wish you'd had yourself or something like that. Celebrate it for it and share it and move on and make the best of it. And we've definitely I think upholstery traditionally or has been quite a closed, protected world, and I think there's been a lot of exploitation of upholsterers throughout history, probably, and I think that has probably kind of led to a certain kind of quiet or reserved, sort of response. But also, it is about that sort of. It's about that, that development of ideas and materials, and actually sort of making it broader. And if we own the stuff we're doing collectively, then actually it by default becomes more sustainable. Because if one person creates an idea and they die.
No,
the idea dies with them.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like a closed shop when we first met, like 10 years ago, and when we had our first exhibition. And I remember we were approaching companies like Kvadrat or whoever, and it was like, "What's upholstery?" And even, they didn't really understand what it was. And I feel like there's
even other upholsterers.
We've met some interesting upholsterers on the journey, but I feel like there's a really great sense of community now, and social media really helps that.
Leanne's
and
really kind of
brought a lot of people together today. It's amazing. And and Robbie with the magazine, and I just feel like you say, that we're not all on our own, kind of doing our own thing, and we're actually a community, and we should all talk. And I think that's a really great
talk. So thanks to the panel. I'm sure hopefully that's got everyone thinking, and we'll speak to you all in a little while. Thank you.